Welcome to What's in a Game, the podcast where free agency has thoroughly broken me. Today we have CT Fazio back to discuss the Nuggets draft and offseason rumors and whether Jokic is entering his LeGM arc. We're also going to talk about the West, how the Western Conference and really the NBA at large is really loading up, and talk about whether Denver is still a title contender. Welcome to What's in a Game. I'm here with my co-host, Will Jones, and our guest, CT Fazio, who we had for our pre-draft special. How are you doing today, CT?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me back on. Appreciate it. We had a great first episode, I thought, previewing the draft, and now we're doing the recap. So kind of cool to get both sides of the equation there. So, great to be back with you guys.
Yeah, I'm glad you came back because I'm sure you do tons of draft analysis, like pre-analysis, and then you don't get to necessarily like come back on and react to what happened or even give takes on other teams' drafts other than like what you tweet out or I'm sure you're on some shows talking about it, but we're glad that you came back and give some final takes.
Will's like, no, our show is special, and it is.
Yeah. It is. It's a great show.
So our listeners don't know like all of the logistics and stuff, but we were going to do a show with you reacting primarily to like the Nuggets draft night and draft night as a whole, but we had to reschedule. So we're actually recording on day 2 of free agency. So we're actually going to get to have your thoughts on a more wide-ranging set of topics having to do with how the Nuggets are building their roster, if that's the word that we can use right now, and a lot of the changes that are happening with teams around the league. So, let's start with the Nuggets side. Like I mentioned right before we started recording, we recorded our last episode during the second round because, or right after the second round, and it was also right after the news about Reggie being traded came out. I was in a particular state at that point, just trying to figure out what the heck was going on, because we had just traded 3 of our last 3 second round picks to, effectively do a salary dump. And I actually don't remember because it was such a kind of blacked it out. Like, Will, what were you thinking in that moment about?
I thought the
Reggie.
same thing, that I thought we were getting the picks, but then I should have known like he wouldn't have given back 3 second round picks. Like I would have figured it'd been like 1 second round pick or 2.
I thought that was crazy. I was like, oh, we're getting 3. What are we doing with these?
Yeah, and then it was just like trying to determine what actually happened because Woj had that little mishap or whatever, and then other people confirmed the deal, and it took just a little bit to confirm that with everyone else. But yeah, CT, what was your reaction to that trade? Because it was during the draft, and so I don't know like the timing of that while the front office should be focused on drafting and stuff like that.
Well, they didn't have a second round pick at that point.
But it was like we were still maybe wondering if they would trade into it. So maybe Calvin just knew they were done and they had focused then to just move to trades and stuff like that. But what was your reaction?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely kind of caught me by surprise because, it was during the draft. It was earlier on my time as well. It was like 4 p.m. Eastern time. So I was like in mid-work, and then I checked my phone and I saw Reggie Jackson traded for 3 second round picks. So I thought, oh, the Nuggets are, entering back into the draft, and maybe they'll select somebody that we kind of spoke about, or maybe they'll have more flexibility. But then I saw it was Reggie for 3 second round picks, and I think that's a steep kind of price to dump for. He's on an expiring contract, and I think personally Reggie had a pretty good year, all things considered. Everything that was kind of asked for him, and I think the playoffs was. I think going into the year, people kind of knew that he wasn't going to be a playoff contributor just because of how the roster's built and Murray's kind of defensive weaknesses. Jokic as well doesn't do well with smaller guards at the point of attack. So kind of figured that.
Yeah,
that would
I mean, what Big does.
Yeah. So I think with that, it was just Reggie had a good regular season, but I was kind of surprised that he was dumped for that much, especially he's on an expiring contract, because I thought maybe you could have attached him with Zeke or, our favorite second round picks, Hunter Tyson and Jalen Pickett. But that, didn't come to fruition. So I think it was a pretty steep price to get off of him. But seems like now with the recent rumors, seems like the Nuggets have another backup guard in their plans. So we'll see if that actually ends up happening.
Yeah, because Grace and I were talking about that. I was shocked that seemingly that was the price to dump him. Because I thought he did pretty good too, like all things considered. Playoffs are the playoffs, but he still hit some shots here and there. I mean, he was a defensive liability, I guess. But yeah, I was surprised. I mean, Grace was saying she thought that Calvin just got fleeced in that, and like that he had to dump it for that much. I don't know if there was any other offers for people wanting Reggie, if that was it, and he didn't have time to really think about it. But yeah, it was
It
steep.
just felt very desperate in a way that I didn't quite understand. I remember what I do remember from that thought process was like, this seems really desperate. Like, why do this now if you are going to eventually have to dump this salary either to clear a roster spot or whatever it is? Maybe you could figure this out then instead of spending 3 second round picks to do it right now. Because who knows, maybe a trade does present itself, that kind of thing. But the timing was very like it just felt very sudden. I had this idea that it this doesn't quite make sense either because of the timing, but it felt like, oh, maybe Calvin is like desperate to clear runway for Jaylin Pickett to get minutes at the backup point guard spot. But again, the timing was so like sudden, it was quick, and it was 3 second round picks. Whether they're bad second round picks or not, because they're end of the second round, those are picks that we still could have like used. They're things that can be used to, lubricate other deals potentially. So that like really threw me for a loop. And I thought, if anything, maybe maybe they're trying to clear like cap space to sign KCP without going over the second apron, although they could always dump again, they could always have dumped that contract later to get back under if that's what it came to. Or maybe they were trying to create room to take back stuff if it turned out the KCP were to leave in a sign and trade. But again, the same logic applies that contract could have been dumped at any point if there was no way to, get something positive from it. So yeah, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, but I'm still confused by the timing and like urgency that they acted with there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. No, I completely agree with both your points. Like I said, it was kind of steep price to dump Reggie, albeit I didn't think he was a bad player this year. And again, I think we could kind of I put on the timeline yesterday, I think we could kind of at this point be critical of Boots' second year on the job. Like I said, I think his first year on the job was a 10 out of 10. Bruce Brown, Christian Brown, KCP trade, was a coup. It was great value for all three of those guys. And then the second year, he leaned too far into the young player direction, gave Zeke that extension, and then he also signed Reggie to the taxpayer MLE, right? So, and we kind of thought that was a handshake deal, when he got bought out. So
Mhm.
that was kind of the thinking there. But we can kind of see now that their roster inflexibility caused them to not go back to back and not even make the Western Conference Finals. So yeah, I think with Reggie, his versatility was something that kind of killed the Nuggets, especially being in more of like a 6-man kind of role. If you want to count CB as like 6B, I would say, just considering Reggie had more offensive responsibility. But I think now the Nuggets are going to have to pivot. And we kind of see at the board right now, a lot of their backup point guards are going off the board. So, it's either at this point, it seems like it's Russell Westbrook or nothing. So
Mhm.
hopefully, we see, come true, or if they get somebody else. I know a couple other guys are available. Markel Fultz is somebody I'd look into, maybe a Dennis Smith,
Unless Orlando just
Kyle
brings back their
Lowry.
entire roster plus
Yeah.
KCP.
Yeah, what would be the like likeliest path to getting Westbrook? Because they're like looking to trade him now, but they may have to just waive him and then he could sign anywhere. But I was like, what would we even trade?
So it's actually so because the Reggie trade isn't like final, like maybe they decide to
Oh,
create
work that
a
into it.
TPE from that with Charlotte, or they work it in as some like 3-team thing, and it basically Russ just
Right.
gets worked in that way and takes up that salary
I was gonna
slot.
say they could have just been a trade straight up, but
Right. The
Yeah.
other, but obviously he hadn't opted in yet at that point.
yeah.
He also could have just not opted in, but he does get more money this way than he would if he just opted out and took a minimum. The other thing that could happen, like you said, the Clippers could waive him. The Clippers could also trade him to someone else who waives him. The reason they might do that is to avoid the cap hit that would be there if they just bought him out.
Mhm.
If you're the Clippers, things have been happening so quickly today's Monday, right? I don't know what day of the week it is.
Yep.
That I don't know the current situation with the Clippers cap sheet. But it wouldn't surprise me if they're kind of bumping up against like the edge of something, maybe on the way to the first apron or something like that, and wanted to save margin that way. So they might trade him to someone else. That team would buy him out, and then Russ would sign a minimum with us. That's another possibility that I've heard discussed. I mean, since we're talking about Russ anyway, what do we think about the fact that
Is this where you're going?
yes, about the fact that Jokic has seemingly been pushing behind the scenes to get Russell Westbrook on the team?
Look at that graphic.
This is courtesy of
it.
Danfa Valley on Twitter. He's always on it with the memes. I personally was a little bit surprised, not shocked or anything, because I know about the, acquaintanceship at least between Jokic and Russ, and the mutual respect there between those two players. But the reason that it surprised me a little bit is mostly because Jokic has, from all accounts, mostly like to keep himself like out of these discussions, and let the team do their jobs. He doesn't interfere with the coaches too much. He doesn't interfere with the front office too much. So yeah, pushing for a very specific player to get on the team is a departure from that. So I find it interesting. What was your reaction to hearing this? Well, because I know you didn't even know that this was the
Yeah.
case until this morning, right?
Yeah, no, not until this morning. I was like very busy, but
We'll
yeah, I
woke
was
up in a daze doing that.
Yeah.
I had seen people like joking about how, the Lakers traded KCP for Westbrook in that trade, and how now we're losing KCP and thinking of adding Westbrook. Totally different circumstance, albeit in
Yeah, that
different
was ludicrous.
expectation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really bad trade on their part. So I was just laughing at the fact that connection now exists kind of for the Nuggets, but obviously it's not the same type of thing. So I'm grateful for that. And we do need a backup point guard. So I don't know if I'm just like accepting it because I'm a Nuggets fan and just trying to look for the best, because we haven't signed a vet point guard. And that's one of the biggest things I wanted to happen in the offseason, besides drafting some good players. Just because we saw that was one of the biggest reasons why we were struggling, just that lack of ball handler alongside Jamal in the second unit. And I wanted a really good option for that. I'm still like thinking about Russ because I saw him a lot on the Lakers, and that was a kind of bad fit. I thought he'd stay with the Clippers because that was a pretty good situation for him, and he seemed
And it
well
seemed
liked.
like they really liked him. That the coaching staff, in particular, Ty Lue, really liked him. Really pushed for them to bring him back this past season.
But it seems like they're already committed to moving him and figuring out something else. Who did they just sign?
Right before we started recording, the news about Chris Dunn going to the Clippers came out, and that seemed like, okay, this is confirmation that like the Clippers are probably going to be moving on from Russ. There probably won't be too many roadblocks to him coming to the Nuggets because the Clippers have basically a new backup point guard now.
That one hurt me.
Yeah.
That was the option I was really hoping for, but I didn't see any like suggestions around that.
Yeah.
I actually was hearing that he might go to Phoenix, so this isn't quite as bad, but it's not us.
Yeah, did you have something in mind for that position, CT, that was more like defensive focused as the point guard vet rather than an offensively focused guard?
Yeah, I wanted Delon Wright as my number one option. He went to the Bucks today, and he signed for the minimum. So it's like the Nuggets could have had him, which is a blow.
So it's confirmed that he signed for the minimum? I haven't seen
like 3.3 million.
Okay, so the number is out there now.
Yeah. So that would have been my number one target for Denver because he, had the versatility to play with solely, Jokic with Murray on the bench, or he could have played beside Murray as well. So Dunn and him and Wright were my two guys. I wrote in my piece after the year that I thought would have been good fits for the Nuggets, just because I think, Dunn obviously his offense is hit or miss and the shooting is a bit problematic, but I think there's like a level from him to Russ, I think, when it comes to that. And my thinking with Russ is that, as a coach, I like to, and I coach middle school, so it's not like we're getting too, involved in spacing and schematics and things like that. But one thing I do like as a coach is having some space, you know what I mean? Having shooters out there on the floor and people that can kind of put pressure on the defense. And I think Russ could do that in certain ways, right? Transition. He's pretty good attacking with a full head of steam, into the paint. But I just see how teams guarded him in the playoffs, and it's like teams are just backing off of him like Ben Simmons, and it's the Nuggets at this point for me in the Jokic era. It's like I never thought we'd be at a point where I'm concerned about the offense in the Jokic era compared to the defense, and
part of it's like at the point when the team was like struggling on the most roster wise, they had all these ball handlers, so you didn't really have to think about that as a weakness or as a deficit or something to massively upgrade. But they've transformed the roster over the last 2 years since Calvin Booth took over, basically.
Mm-hmm. I think it was good calculus by Booth. I know a lot of people are criticizing him over the past couple of days, and there's been a lot of talk about him tanking the team and things like that. But I've kind of talked myself a little bit into Russ, a tiny bit. I don't know how he really plays with Jokic, to be honest with you. If there's a guy maybe that could make it work, maybe it's Jokic. But, if you're playing Gordon and Russell together, I don't think that's going to work. I think you probably have to have a lot of spacing.
Right.
If you play Murray and Russ, I think Russ actually at this point is a pretty good defender on the ball, at least. He's pretty physical. What is he, 6'4"? So
good
not
size.
the smallest guy in the world.
He's strong.
Very strong. I think he could scale up a little bit too, guarding some wings in that aspect as well. So, some wings. But I do think defensively he'll hold up well. And I think with the bench, they were just lacking a ton of like offensive juice, right? And I think if we see Russ kind of be more of a facilitator type, I think maybe it'll work in the regular season. And then once we see the playoffs, that might be a different story, which again, then the Nuggets have a lot of more unplayable guys in the playoffs, it could be a problem. But I've talked myself into it maybe working with the bench a little bit, because if I put it out there today, if you have a bench of Russ, Strawther, Watson, Vlatko, and Holmes, I think that's pretty good, because Vlatko and Holmes could stretch the floor. Strawther, at least hypothetically, is a good shooter, but the thing with Strawther is he puts up volume, right? He's a volume shooter, and that matters compared to the percentage. And Watson, obviously, I think is more hit or miss, but I do like that lineup of having a couple other shooters out there, and you can kind of mix and match in the front court as well. So I think maybe it could work. I think next to Murray, it could work a little bit, trying to play Murray off the ball, get him some more catch and shoot looks, running him off of staggers as well. So I think there's an option too. And I think too, just kind of to wrap up the point, I think, Westbrook having the athleticism that he does still at his age matters. The Nuggets are just kind of lacking a lot of pop in the backcourt, next to Murray. So, Russ is still a great athlete, a great downhill driver. I think playing him next to a lob threat like Holmes would work really well. And I think, him and Holmes in the pick and roll could be good too, because Holmes could pass. He could, stretch the floor as well. Could put Russ in the dunker spot too sometimes. So I think there's worse options. I'm still skeptical it works in the playoffs, but at least in the regular season, I think that it could be an upgrade over Reggie.
Yeah, since we're just on this point, I'll ask about Jalen Pickett. And because Calvin Booth, we'd been talking about how he may just envision Jalen Pickett being a backup point guard and trying to clear space for him with moving Reggie. We still haven't signed Russell Westbrook, but that's the heavy rumor. I don't think even Calvin Booth would deny that we need an additional point guard and ball handler. But would he be worried about how that would affect Jalen Pickett's playing time? Like, would it cause more stress with Malone? Or do you just think we have enough room to have multiple guards like this, whether to stagger with Jamal or not? And that's just something we have to do.
Yeah, I think that's probably with Pickett. I think it shouldn't be kind of in the equation, I think, just because he's a second round player. I know he signed to a multi-year deal on the roster. Admittedly, I know we spoke about it last pod. I'm a bit lower on Pickett than a lot of other people. So I do think that they need a veteran guy to play next to Murray in certain instances, try to carry the bench as well. And it's something against Pickett. I just think he's probably too inexperienced at this point. And again, he's a second rounder, so I think people are really like expecting a lot from him. So I don't think it's really his fault, but I think Booth probably has to acknowledge that they need another veteran backup. Whether that's Russ or somebody else who else is out there right now. I think that having too many of those young guys is definitely problematic. Especially now that your Brown's probably going to be in the starting lineup, and now you're going to play Strawther, Holmes, and Watson. That's you add another rookie to the equation compared to last year where you're playing three of those guys, three young guys. Now you're playing four. So
they're not going to be rookies anymore, except Duran. So
that
at least
true.
There's that.
Yeah, that is true. And I think Vlatko coming back will help as well. He's a veteran. He knows how to play. A good shooter, pretty good passer as well. Like,
pretty versatile. Like,
yeah, he's versatile.
He can play with a lot of different players, right?
Yep. And I think too, you could play him in 5-out lineups. If you want to play Strawther, you could play in place of Brown, right? You could play Strawther in that. You could play Vlatko instead of AG. With Mike at the 3. I think that's at least an offensively good kind of look there. So, but yeah, just to conclude about the Pickett point, I think he's probably not in the plan. Unless he has like a dynamic summer league, I don't think he's in the plan as far as like being like a rotation thought. Maybe just a third string going into the year.
Yeah, Grace, really quick. When I heard about the Russ news and I was talking to myself into it, I definitely was like getting sold in my mind on his rim pressure, and then also maybe playing like as a pick and roll threat with Holmes and the rebounding, stuff like that. The shooting is a big concern. Where did you kind of end up on this? Were you like more for it, or were you just slowly growing on it? Or where are you at?
So I've like joked online a fair bit whenever the idea of I think like Russ has come up and CP3 has also come up, when one of these like used to be like really really like MVP caliber point guards, but they're really old now, and they have like Russ in particular has some baggage off court wise or not basketball related as well, right? You have to worry about chemistry and things like that. Is he going to be willing to come off the bench and things like that? But I actually think it's way better than what we've had, particularly this past year. I agree with you about the rim pressure. Even if the pull-up shooting is really tough, he is really good at pressuring the rim, even when guys are going under on his screens. And he's really good at finding the big in pick and roll, which, at first I was like, I'm really worried about his finishing at the rim because it's not great, but it's not like Reggie's was amazing either. But I think that like Russ is like a point guard. He's really good at finding people, both in pick and roll when it's like a drive and kick situation as well. I think that he actually hit his stride for most of the season with the Clippers coming off of the bench, because he did kind of find that niche of, let me come off the bench. I'm going to push pace. We're going to drive and kick. I'm going to pressure the paint and, try to create some easy stuff for, the rest of the guys on the floor. And so I actually really like the idea because I can see how it can work. It's more a question of, is that going to be how he plays consistently? Is he going to stay consistently engaged on the floor? Things like that. And the fact of the matter is we do need another ball handler, right? Like, it's not like there's someone else on the floor for the most part that we want the ball in their hands, because we have all these Jokic ball players that play so well off the ball. And, we're facing this like dearth of ball handling at the moment, in terms of primary initiation, primary creation. So I actually don't think it's a bad idea. I do see ways basketball wise that it can, pose its challenges, like CT says, especially with the spacing. But Russ is still incredibly athletic, especially for someone his age, but even for an NBA player. And I think that he could, fit in if we're deciding to like play him in the dunker spot, some possessions, things like that. He's a really good offensive rebounder, even if he, has to switch out onto, like a bigger wing or even like a center sometimes. Like, he'll beat those guys to the boards, even if he kind of like gets got positionally or something like that. So I think that, like you said, there are worse options, and I'm warming to the idea. The one other, I think, I don't know if it's a big positive, but it's just something to consider, how this whole season felt like a real slog, right? And I've already talked about how Russ is this player who he can be someone that comes onto the floor and injects a lot of energy into how the team is playing and completely change the tone of a game, for better or worse. But in addition to that, like Yoke is asking for him, apparently, right? That's what's reported, is that Yoke's been pushing for this behind the scenes. And I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world to have someone who Jokic is asking for, who consistently brings that energy every single night, even when we're playing like the Wizards on a Tuesday. So I'm kind of like, I don't know how this is going to go, but I am also worried if we don't do anything this off season. So
Yeah.
rocking a hard place.
I
Yeah.
think Duran and Westbrook would bring more energy and freshness to like the whole group.
Mhm.
And that
Yeah.
would be really nice. And also DeAndre Jordan was like reportedly like talking to the front office about what Russ like might
That's
bring, because
true.
he played with him, I think, in LA on the Lakers for that little bit. Obviously, I hope we don't post this and like Russ, it's already over. He signed with someone else or traded somewhere and we're not getting him after talking about this. But the moral of this story is we need someone like this, some archetype like this, vet point guard. The options are dwindling at this point, so hopefully we have some news soon. But you want to move to our starting point guard and talk about that?
Yes. So the other news that came, there was a lot that came in succession on the day of the second round of the draft. We got news that KCP was probably going to go. Now we know that he's gone. We also found out that the Nuggets and Jamal are apparently working on a max extension that is expected to be signed basically as soon as Jamal is extension eligible on July 6th. Were you at all surprised by that news, CT?
Yeah, I think I was on, the first show. I think I said that I would kind of think that he'd wait until the season started, or he'd
Mhm.
go into free agency and test it then. I personally, I think it's a good move to kind of get the money when it's presented to you. Because you just never know what's going to happen. So I think that's a kind of a good thing, and I think it's good for the Nuggets as well. We're kind of seeing all the narratives out there that the Nuggets are cheaping out and not paying people. So I'm happy that the Nuggets are keeping Murray and Jokic together for the long term. It seems like so. I was maybe a little bit surprised, but also pretty ecstatic that it seems like it's going to get done.
Yeah, if Jamal signs this deal, it'll take him into 1 year after Jokic's current contract. So, we'll see what the team looks like then. But I hope he signs it. Like I thought that this is what would happen, that the team would present it. I thought Jamal would sign, mostly because again, his agent should tell him to sign. But we'll see what happens. I know there's like a wee bit of consternation at the moment that we haven't gotten the announcement that he's intending to sign yet. Um, but those initial reports about the extension, it sounded like the information was coming from both sides, like Jamal's whatever agent
Yeah.
and the team, and that it's expected that he's going to sign. So I don't know what more news people necessarily want to hear about that. If he doesn't sign it after July 6th, then we can have some questions about like, oh, is he going to try to go for all NBA next year? I don't know. We'll discuss that we'll cross that bridge when we come to. I'm
Yeah.
incredibly tired right now.
No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad Jamal's back. I'm sad that KCP is gone. So I guess we could dive into losing him. And
Biggest story of the offseason for the Nuggets.
yeah, I was leading up to this. I think a lot of fans were worried all last season that we may not keep him. And there weren't a lot of reports coming out about an extension getting done. We probably figured he would opt out. And then it was a matter of figuring out how to bring him back, which we couldn't do. Calvin Booth had many opportunities to talk about this, and he basically vaulted CB as the replacement, which I'm now slowly rationalizing myself into being excited for, just because this is the reality we're into. But I definitely wanted KCP to stay. What are your thoughts on this, CT, and how confident are you in Christian Brown?
It's a bit sad that KCP is leaving. just because he was a key cog on the championship team. First in franchise history, and as a fan, all these years, you kind of yearn for that championship, and they brought in KCP, and he had that experience, and he brought that to the table, and he was a very integral part of that championship team. So I always have fond memories and great things to say about him. But yeah, no, it's the reality now that there was some talk online that of some of the writing that I saw that KCP kind of wanted to be closer to home as he's kind of his career is getting into the later stages. So that could have been a factor as well. Tony Jones and I spoke on Twitter, like like on the timeline, and he said that the Nuggets matched the offer for him. So, I guess take that for what what it's worth. So it seems like maybe the Nuggets tried to kind of give him a competitive offer, but he went to the Magic. But yeah, I was the Christian Brown guy in the draft 2 years ago. Big advocate, to kind of draft him, and it's his time to shine now. And I think his trajectory, I put on the timeline the other day, his trajectory I think is very impressive. 4-star recruit in high school, not a top 100 guy. Then he goes to Kansas, and he kind of works his way up, right? And Kansas is a program that has so many great players, right? Ochai Agbaji and so many wings that they had that CB had to leap the hierarchy of, and he was a all Big 12 player and won a national championship for them, and I think he's on the trajectory that he's gonna that starting is the next logical step in his career, and I think KCP brings, not KCP, I think Brown brings a lot to the table that KCP lacked. A lot more speed, I think, end to end. I think as far as an offensive rebounder, Brown is better in that aspect. I think Brown's a bit bigger as well. I think he plays bigger than KCP. He's more physical. But also, too, I think as far as a screen navigator and things like that, Brown is lacking in that area, but I do think he can get better. This is someone who hasn't played starters minutes, yet. So I think this is going to be the first step for him to see, how that fares. And I'm of the belief that Brown's next step in his career is becoming a starter. And there are some things that he brings to the table, like I said, that are pretty good as far as adding to what the starters lacked. As far as that positional height, better. I think they're going to really be great on the boards, especially when they took a step back last year in that department. And Brown's shooting got better last year as well. Albeit on limited volume, but I do think that he's not going to be a guy that you can just leave open and dare him to shoot, because I think he's someone who can actually get into the paint and make decisions and kick out to different players and things like that. So I'm optimistic about it. I think KCP obviously is a better player right now, no doubt. More versatile offensively. Brings a lot more different kind of aspects defensively as well. But I do think Brown, at least at this point for me, seeing him in the playoffs against Anthony Edwards, I have the belief that the starting lineup is going to be okay in the regular season at least. And we kind of saw that lineup really. And if you look at the data, obviously it was kind of limited. They were really good in that span. And we saw Booth kind of mention that as well, as trying to maybe, deflect from KCP leaving. But
yeah,
I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be good, but there are some questions, when it gets to the playoffs, how is Brown going to fare? Is he going to be someone who, record scratches possessions? That's my biggest issue with Brown, is that he's not very decisive with the ball when it comes to attacking closeouts. And he should be, though, because when he's attacking in a straight line, he could really put people on a poster, and he's great at, dunking on people, he really is, and I think that's hopefully this summer, him working with trainers, and hopefully he can kind of improve that part of his game where attacking closeouts and making decisions on the move and things like that. But defensively, I think Brown defensively is going to fit right in. I don't think the Nuggets are going to lose a beat on that end of the floor. And, he was tabbed for me when I was scouting him as the best closeout defender in his class. And I think that's kind of held up as we've seen, in the league this year. So
let's get him as one of the best closeout attackers now.
Yeah, listen, I'm all for it.
Actually, that what you said before about the hesitation in attacking closeouts and what he could do if he trusted his athleticism, it reminded me of, I don't remember if it was the game 80 against the Wolves and he had that poster over Rudy, or if it was another game where he had this ridiculous transition lob. I think it was a transition lob dunk. It might have been against the Jazz or something. But in the post game, Christian was talking about how And I think Peyton also spoke after this game because they had both been like really good in whatever game it was. They talked about how Peyton is always telling Christian that like he's like really sneaky athletic and like he can really get up there if he like wants to. And I think that's the thing is like I see all these tools that Christian has. He's got this size, he's got strength. He doesn't have like elite burst, but I think that he can like you say, attack closeouts more effectively than he does if he didn't hesitate so much. But it's just about like getting to a point where he trusts those tools and knows how to like has the feel to fully like maximize them, right?
Yeah, I made a point earlier that last season there was a lot of differing opinions on him and whether he was kind of in a sophomore slump. And I think CT, you were the one of the people still arguing like Christian Brown's been fine. Like it's not like he's been terrible. A
Mhm.
lot of people were critical of him because he wasn't popping as much as he did in his rookie season where he was surprising everybody. And I think people had huge expectations for him. Now he's going to have more expectations because he's a starter. But I think part of the problem with his season last season was that we weren't quite sure exactly how to play him in what lineups. And then when Jamal goes down, that shifts the hierarchy and then it kind of complicates it more. And like, what should his role be and what should he focus on? And Malone even had like a point in the season where he was like, I need to find Christian ways for him to like be himself and be impactful again because maybe they were focusing on the wrong thing. Like maybe he was focusing way too much on spot ups or something like that, and not just being aggressive and attacking the boards or stuff like that. This time, I'm hoping that since he's in the starters and he's playing with Jokic and Jamal and these very good decision makers, very elite basketball players, that the reads that he's going to have to make are going to be a little more simple, like when he needs to attack closeouts, when he needs to pass, whatever it is that he needs to do. I'm hoping it's going to be easier for him just because it's just more clear with who's supposed to be doing what rather than when he was playing with the bench. Um, but I don't know if like him watching KCP on tape on KCP playing with the starters can help him at all. I know they're not quite the same player. They have some different skill sets, but I think like he's in a position to succeed with Malone and like Jokic. Like Jokic doesn't need four other players to make him succeed. Like he's the one who makes everyone else around him succeed. So maybe that's why I'm like optimistic because I believe so much in Jokic. But
Yeah, I have actually two more points I wanted to add, before maybe moved on. I think it's interesting as well. If you look at, the last kind of starters for at that two guard spot for the Nuggets, right? You see a Will Barton was more of an offensively dynamic player than defensively, more of a playmaker on that end. We could kind of put Jamal off the ball and Will could play make in that aspect. And then fast forward now, if KCP is more of a spot up guy, could take a dribble or two and get to a spot, but obviously more potent defensively. And I think Brown is a guy where he's different than both of those guys, right? He's more of a slasher, a really good rebounder. I think defensively too, like he's with more like kind of ample opportunity now. We're going to see more of his his defense really shine on that end of the floor. And I'm sorry, I think as well. I think playing beside Watson was a bit of a struggle for him last year. Those lineups were
mhm.
not really not really great spacing wise. So I think that him playing with the starters and away from Watson, I think that might be a good kind of more proper fit for both units now.
Yeah, that's a good point. He also may be more durable than I mean KCP was pretty durable too. There are times where you get some tweaks, little injuries, but CB's pretty young. Hopefully he can play the whole season and stay healthy.
I want to talk a little bit about just a couple of the teeny tiny moves that have either happened for the Nuggets or haven't or like on the way to happening, right? So I don't remember on our last episode if it had yet been announced that the Nuggets were probably going to bring Vlatko back after they declined his team option. Is that right? And they're probably going to sign him on a minimum. That's not official yet. So I'm actually still waiting on that news because I need to keep track of all of this salary cap stuff. But the first thing that happened on the day of free agency, Nuggets wise anyway, was DeAndre Jordan is back. And there was a very mixed response to DeAndre Jordan being back. Um, I think fans are basically upset about like five other things about the roster. And so when that was announced, like the morning that free agency was going to start, um, all of that sort of anger, well, not all of it because there was more to come, but a lot of it was being channeled into responding to like, why is he taking up a roster spot? Why are we spending that kind of money? There was some um, misunderstanding of the difference between how much of the cap is taken up by a vet minimum versus how much money the player actually gets. And I just wanted to talk about it a little bit because I think DJ has been really great for the team as a locker room presence. He is really close with Jokic as well. Will, you talked earlier in the show about how he is perhaps also behind the scenes advocating for Russ and what he could bring to the team. And he's taking on that like Udonis Haslem type of role. However, now that we know that KCP's gone, we have 2 roster spots left if you sort of tick one off for you just reserve one for Vlatko. You have 2 roster spots left for veterans. You know, obviously, if DJ weren't on the team, we could potentially sign somebody else who could play. What would you say to somebody who was trying to make that argument to you about like, well, we have all these people that aren't playing. Why sign another?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Dad, for me, I think is a good vet for the team. Really good leader in the locker room as well. I think at times he showed that he's playable last year. You know, not on an every night basis, but I do think sometimes he is playable. He was a lob threat, decent passer, pretty good athlete still at his age, which is pretty impressive. So, but yeah, I mean, he can definitely, and I think I put it there yesterday as well in the timeline that having Zeke, Dayron, Jokic, and DJ is kind of like a lot of bigs. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Zeke does get moved soon, or something like that. But because I don't know
I'd
at this
only be
point,
surprised because I'd be shocked if they figured out a way to do it.
yeah, maybe we'll get some team. Maybe Mr. Weaver will take on Zeke, but we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think it's kind of tough because the Nuggets are basically tanking a couple spots on their roster still at this point. If you look at like a Tyson or a Pickett and DJ as well,
Yeah.
so it's kind of tough. But I'm indifferent to him being back or not.
Yeah, this was like the one thing that I knew was going to happen this offseason. Everything else was pretty up in the air in my mind. Yeah, okay. So now that we've gone through most of the Nuggets offseason stuff, let's get on to the draft. We have some really positive things to talk about. We got Deron Holmes. We were all watching the draft live-ish, right? And we knew that the rumors of a promise that the Nuggets had made were out there, and we knew that other teams certainly had at least enough interest in Deron for him to be mocked to a couple of different teams than the Nuggets earlier before the actual night of the draft, right? We traded up to get him. We traded 3 second-round picks to trade up with the Phoenix Suns to get Deron at 22, right before the Milwaukee Bucks. Do you think that John Horst, the GM of the Bucks, would have taken Deron if we had not traded up with Phoenix to get him?
Yes, I do. I think so because if you, I don't want to be, as a draft analyst, I don't want to be too critical of picks. But the Bucks, for me, I think they kind of panicked with their next pick. They took AJ Johnson, who was somebody who's a long ways away, playing, an overseas in the league. He did. I think Deron was the guy for them, and they kind of had to pivot off that. So I know there's a couple teams in that range that wanted Holmes. The Knicks. It was rumored that the Wolves wanted him as well, and also maybe the Bucks. So I think those were kind of 3 teams that wanted Holmes. I don't think he would have lasted at 28 just because of how kind of I think he was a really great prospect. So, Booth did what he did, and he went and got his guy, and I think that's important. I think that it's important. I think that he's a GM that has very strong convictions. That he's very set to say, you know what, we're going to take Christian Brown here, and we're going to take Watson at this pick, and we're going to take Strother, and we're going to take these guys, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. At least he tried, and he was kind of convinced. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He didn't hesitate. So I think that's a good part of the way he kind of operates. So, but yeah, I was very happy that they got him because I think he fills a need, and I also think that he was best player available at that pick as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I also think that the Bucks, when you say they had the panic pick, it seems is it AJ Johnson was
Yeah.
the prospect they took there. I had also seen like Kalel Ware and Yves Missy mocked to them as well, but Kalel got taken surprisingly to me by the Miami Heat in the lottery,
Yep.
and Yves Missy went to the Pelicans
Mhm.
like right before. I think they were at 20. So they probably would have taken one of those two, in my opinion, if not for if Duran had been off the board, but obviously they were not available. So that was interesting. It was an interesting, I think, draft night for other teams in the first round in particular. But before we talk about other teams, I want to finish off talking about what the Nuggets did on day 2. So they traded out of the second round when they traded one of those. Their 1 second round pick was part of the deal to trade up with Phoenix, as well as a couple of future second round picks. And they didn't end up drafting anybody in the second round, but they did sign 3 guys to 2-way contracts. And Will, if you could bring up the video of Trey Alexander, because he
Let's
is
go.
my favorite of the 3. I remember CT talking about Trey with me. I think it was back in like February or something.
Yeah.
Because I was talking to CT about like who should the Nuggets draft, especially as like a potential more ball handler depth. And you actually thought that the Wolves might be interested in Trey. So it was pretty surprising to me when I saw that he went undrafted at all, because I agreed. Not only would they might be interested, but I think he's a really like interesting ball handler, prospect, shot creator. But he's also Mike Conley's cousin. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So CT, could you tell me like why I see Jamal Murray when I see Trey Alexander play basketball?
I've had a lot of people, bring up that comp before, and I could see why. Luckily been able to see Trey play a lot in person over the years, playing in the Big East. I actually saw him play at the Garden last year against St. John's, where he dropped like 30 points. Really good game from him, and I thought at that point like he'd go in contention for the first round. This was the game here, right here. Really good showing. And I think at Creighton over the years, he's really developed his game and kind of taken many leaps over the years as well. Assuming higher usage over the years. This year he played off the ball a little bit, but Creighton didn't really have, I would say, a pure point guard. They had more of a scoring 3-point guard. So Trey had assumed a lot of on the ball responsibility as well. The thing I like Trey is that he's a really dynamic mid-range shooter. He's able to really get into the mid-range and finish with a floater, finish isolation, finish in the pick and roll. And I think
Very versatile shot creation. Yeah.
Definitely very versatile as a shot creator. 6'4" guard, and he took the assignment of the best opposing player on the other team, in the backcourt for Creighton. He was guarding Devin Carter. If you really want to watch a game like that, you can see like Trey's ability shine. It's against Providence, versus Providence. Even against UConn as well. When UConn came to Creighton blew them out. He was guarding Tristan Newton, he was guarding Stephon Castle, and I think Trey's really underrated as far as his ability as a shot creator, but also as a two-way player. He's a really good defender at 6'4", can play on or off the ball as well, and I think that versatility is something that the Nuggets lack. And yeah, I'll go on the record here saying that I think he's a better player than Pickett. So we'll see, what happens there. But I think it's a big summer league coming up for him to see if he can kind of make an imprint, moving forward. But yeah, this was a guy that I talked about as a first round guy, earlier, like Gray said earlier in the year. So to see him kind of go undrafted, I think that was a really great value. And I think Calvin did a really good job in the 2-ways this year compared to last year, where kind of picked proven commodities, and this year he kind of picked more versatile college players. So I thought it was a good pick.
He's a bit on the lighter side. He does have good like height. He's almost 6'4" without shoes, but he's only 187 right now. So definitely need to fill out more, probably for the NBA level. But so like you said, they signed him on this 2-way. Will, was there anything that you wanted to say about or ask about this prospect?
I was just kind of surprised that he fell to us, or well, we didn't draft him, but that he was available and went undrafted. and we had talked about the draft maybe not being the best draft class of all time, and we had heard that sentiment all year, all season. But during the draft, seeing people's reactions was really interesting. Talking about people trading and going up and getting Dillingham, and now Trey Alexander's coming to us. So when it comes to him, my question was more broad. Like, how did you feel now that the draft's over about the reactions to the draft, and whether teams were aggressive? Because it seems like people had a very clear vision for what they wanted, like in the players they were going after. And this guy who's really talented not getting drafted in a draft class that seemingly wasn't that great. Like, what did you make of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think, when you see the kind of depth of the class was pretty good, I think. When you kind of like go down the board, like later in the first round, his teammate Baylor Shireman got picked by the Celtics at 30. I was pretty high on Baylor, and, at my draft board, I had him as like a top 25-ish guy. But yeah, I think with Trey, it's just, I think teams were a bit concerned about his quickness and speed as a guard. Plays a bit more methodical like Murray does. She's not going to wow you with athleticism, but he did catch a couple posters this year. Creighton almost had a triple double as well. And he's a multifaceted guard. He could rebound, he could assist. Pretty good shooter as well, and he can play on or off the ball. So, like, I think hypothetically, if he gets the chance, like him next to Murray would be kind of a good fit. But yeah, I think more
Jamal
so
playing with himself.
Yeah, two of those
it's like
guys.
what Jokic said, I wish I had two of me.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of like just him sliding down the board, where his teams were a little bit more concerned about the athleticism angle of it, and the shooting was kind of hit or miss as well. And kind of he's more of a tweener.
Shooting.
Yeah, 3-point shooting, and he's more of a tweener as well. Like, is he a point guard? Is he a shooting guard? Can he successfully do both? I think that's mainly the question with him. But I think on a two-way, it's great value for the Nuggets.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the summer league, and if he plays in the G League and gets experience, and who knows, he could surprise us. And we need bodies, we need people. So please, whoever, please step up.
We need bodies. So another one of the two ways was PJ Hall, who I want to talk about a little bit. I mentioned on our last show how we signed PJ Hall from Clemson, and he was Hunter Tyson's teammate for a really long time at Clemson, because I think Hunter was a super senior at Clemson. He was there 5 years. So he played with PJ for a pretty long time. He's classified himself as like a center, but I've also seen him play with other bigs at Clemson. Can you just talk a little bit about what position is he exactly, and what kind of role do you see for him? Like, he's going to be on a two-way. He's probably going to be playing mostly in the G League anyway, but what kind of position do you see for him, on an NBA floor?
Yeah, I think with Hall, I think he's definitively a 5, I would say, even though he's a bit smaller. But he's pretty physical, though. If you see in these clips, he's really throwing his weight around the paint. Really able to carve out space as well, and he's really physical. But he's got the ability to play inside out. If you watch him in the tournament, he really carved up a lot of the teams he faced. I think they made the Elite Eight. He was really good in that game in the Elite Eight to put them into that position. So he's a good passer as well for a big. He can really set the offense up. Kind of use him as a hub as well. So yeah, I think he's going to be he's interesting, at least. He's got a pretty versatile skill set. Defensively, I think is more hit or miss, but I do like the mobility for the most part. And I think offensively is going to be his calling card. Where he can kind of attack closeouts a bit. You can dump the ball down to him in the post.
Yeah, really comfortable putting the ball on the floor from different parts of the court.
Like Duran as well. Duran's pretty comfortable putting the ball on the deck, and I think PJ is the same way. But yeah, I think he's going to be a pretty good, like I said, pretty good two-way signing for what the Nuggets kind of got there.
So, did you want to say anything?
I was just going to say, if he ends up being like the next underrated 5, like iHeart, and we move off him too quick, and he signs this massive deal with the Thunder, I'm going to be pissed. God.
We're definitely going to talk about some of those massive deals. But okay, so the last prospect I'm going to talk about was Jaylin Williams. I believe the Nuggets signed him to an Exhibit 10. Is that right? So that is a deal that gives the Nuggets basically first rights to convert it to a two-way should they want to. But he could play on the summer league team. He could participate in training camp, that kind of thing, until the Nuggets were to make such a decision. And I hadn't really looked into him as much, but he's like a forward, right? More
Mhm.
like a He's more like a 3-4 in the NBA, but he definitely seemed to play a little bit bigger at Auburn. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit about him and what maybe the Nuggets are maybe interested in when they took this? Because I didn't really necessarily expect them to, even if they took a couple of undrafted guys. They only signed 2 of their 3 two-way slots, but they also signed this guy to an Exhibit 10. I wonder like what's the vision that they're seeing right now in terms of who they're putting in their developmental pipeline?
Yeah, I actually think it was rumored from what I read in the article that the Nuggets wanted to take him at 56 if they kept
Mm.
the pick.
Oh,
Um, yeah, that's what I read in the article from I think an Auburn person wrote that. Um, but yeah, I've been a fan of Jalen for a while. You know, he was a fifth year senior this year. Um, Played in a really good Auburn team. You know, over the years, versatile forward, really athletic as well. Really good closeout attacker. You know, could really put you on a poster and quick decision maker and um, really good shooter this year. I think he shot around like 30, like 38%. I want to say around there. You know, he's been pretty good as far as increasing his volume and pretty good slasher. Good defender for a 4-man, 3-man. I think he play more of the wing. In college, you play the 4 because I mean, in college, you can if you really are like 6'7", 6'6", like you can get away with playing the 4. But I think Jalen's probably gonna play the 3. But yeah, no, I'm just high on Jalen. Like he's gonna make it. I think he's gonna be a player in this league as far as like an end of the bench guy or a rotation piece on like a like maybe on a worse team. But um, I think Jalen's going to be good. You know, like I said, I'm in favor from getting the last two-way, but the Nuggets have a lot of wings right now, so I don't know how he's going to fare there. But I think you could have done worse on the two-ways, but and the Exhibit 10 deal. So I think he's going to be pretty good. And he played beside your favorite player, Grace, and Janai Broom.
Oh yeah,
So
I is that how you say his name? I've been saying
Janai, yeah,
Janai. Okay, not
yep.
Johnny. Janai. I love Janai Broom. I really
mhm.
was sad when he withdrew from the draft. I think in this draft class he would have absolutely gone first round, but unless teams were just all totally dumb. But we're going to talk about that a little bit because Will, you alluded to this a little bit with certain teams being particularly aggressive to like get the specific guys that they wanted, especially with the Wolves and Tim Conley going after Rob Dillingham. Yeah, the Wolves, they traded up for Rob Dillingham. They traded with the Spurs, some future picks with the Spurs to move up to 8 in this draft, and so that they could take Rob Dillingham. When I first saw that the Spurs had picked him, I thought, okay, that's another guard, and we could use Wemby to protect him defensively or whatever. And who knows? Like it's a flyer. They're drafting in the lottery. Why not? But then I found out the Wolves were taking him instead. The Wolves got to keep their pick in the first round because they were trading future picks. So they still got to pick at 27.
Mhm.
And we've talked a bit on the show about how they need shot creation, but they decided to pass on Isaiah Collier. What do you think of that strategy of kind of just they got their guy. They got their guy in Dillingham. They still had another opportunity to get another shot creator in Collier, but they decided instead to go with Terrence Shannon Jr., who I think
Mhm.
is another great prospect. We've talked about him as a possibility for the Nuggets, as like a plan B, plan C type thing in the first round. But he's not exactly like what at least in my opinion the Wolves need. So yeah, what do you think of them passing on Collier?
I think it's interesting because I had Collier as a top 5 guy on my board, so I had Dillingham a little bit further down, had him in the top 10. I personally would have preferred Collier just because I think he's a more uh, playable defender than Dillingham. I think Dillingham defensively was really not. If you watch the tape of Kentucky, was not great at all. Was pretty concerning, especially in that tournament. Like, we got really like torched badly. Um, I think with him though, you can kind of see the vision what Connolly wants, and this is one of those classic Connolly trades, right, where
God,
he's
I
going for the
know.
smaller guard. Uh, and it makes sense because the Wolves can maybe compensate a bit for his deficiencies. You know, they have Jaden McDaniels, they have an Anthony Edwards, they have Gobert, right? You know what I mean? So they have
Yeah.
wing defenders and they have a best rim protector to probably ever play the game, right? So, um, I think it makes sense, but I do think now that the Wolves, it kind of looks like it'd be Conley's successor, right down the line, maybe. when Conley ages out.
Oh,
But
right. That Conley, the
Conley,
guard.
sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Conley. Yeah, but I do think that it does add a bit more of a vulnerable spot for the Wolves, when you have him out there because you could really attack him defensively. But they're betting on the shot creation, they're betting on the dynamic offense and the creation ability and the shooting panning out over the defense. So interesting move, Conley trading future assets to get their guy. And I think it's interesting as well because a lot of the discussion for the Nuggets was maybe they should trade their assets and go up to get a guy right in that lottery pick
Mhm.
range. And Conley did that. He went and got his guy in Dillingham. That was his guy. And, we'll see if that works. But he went up to get his guy and that, we'll see how that kind of fares. But at least he went for it and he had to trade future assets, right? So he traded like one or how many first round picks?
It was like a pick and a half basically. Um it
One
was it
first, I
was
know.
a first and and two swaps, I
Uh,
think.
I think that's cheaper than I thought it was then.
Maybe it was just one swap then. It
But
was
he did
definitely like at least a swap and a first.
because he moved up to 8, right? Was it 8
Yeah,
or 10?
Yeah,
So I
8.
mean, he did move up pretty far up the board
right.
Mhm.
from where they were kind of at. So and he got to keep that late to first with to pick Terrence Shannon, which I think TSJ is a good player. But I
It
don't
was
think he
an
really addressed a lot
unprotected
of their
first and
needs.
a protected swap.
Okay, so that's a bit down
Yeah.
the line, right, for the
Yeah.
swap. So
Yeah, I
makes sense.
heard Tim Connolly was just like enamored with Dillingham. Like he saw him and he was super high. He was talking about how amazing he was, how impressed he was. It's like it it is very classic Tim Connolly, a small guard who could potentially be attacked on defense, which we saw over and over again here in Denver. And maybe this works out for him and he looks like a genius still and people can laud him as a, great GM, or there are going to be some questions with that pick. But they could have picked Collier again,
Right,
right?
right.
Which is pretty wild. But do you feel like even like with drafting Dillingham, there's no way they could have drafted Collier, or should they have like kind of like Grace was saying, doubled down and tried to just solidify their shot creator?
Yeah, I think it probably would have been a bit too redundant. I think because you have Conley on the roster, you have and obviously can play point as well, and you have Dillingham and Collier is a better defender than Dillingham, but he's not the best on that end. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think picking Shannon it was smart because it looked like they moved up with Wendell Moore now as well, which was another one of their first round picks that Conley took. That was actually Conley's first pick, I think, on the job.
Mm,
And I think he got picked before his TB, if I'm not mistaken. Don't
wow.
quote me on that, but I do think that he was picked before Christian. So, but yeah, they kind of basically was a swap, right? You kind of traded out Wendell Moore, and he moved Terrence Shannon into that role. So,
Gotcha.
kind of makes sense from a positional standpoint. But yeah, I think the Dillingham pick is it's interesting, because the second apron stuff and how do you improve the
Hmm.
roster? And like we said, Conley had his guy, and he went for it, and we'll see if it pans out.
Yeah, the Wolves are in an interesting place, kind of almost similar to the Nuggets, depending how you look at it, where they're contending teams. They just need to make a couple more moves, maybe. The Nuggets have won a championship already. The Wolves are in the hunt. They have a need that they're trying to address. The Nuggets lost things that worked well for them that we're still trying to replace. So it's going to be interesting with this new CBA and how these GMs are operating, trying to find like our assistant GM, and when he was introducing Duran, was saying that teams really succeed when they find like their niche that they're good at, this special thing they're good at. And the Nuggets feel like they have this super clear idea of the thing that they want to do with these young players, and that's going to be the thing that they're going to be good at and contributing with Jokic. So we'll see how that works out. I'm hoping it does.
And I just thought it was a really interesting draft and, just kind of summarizing it in that way that in this, like bad draft, teams were very aggressive in getting specifically what they wanted. And so we saw a couple of surprises in who slipped back just because other teams already had a specific idea of what they wanted. So it wasn't necessarily going for a, best player available strategy necessarily. Like we talked about Dalton Connect falling to the Lakers and Isaiah Collier falling, obviously. So yeah, it's just an interesting, trend.
But yeah, CT, you said, as an analyst, you don't want to like knock any picks, but did you have any teams that you were like, they won the draft possibly, or I really like what this team did?
I really liked what the Spurs did. I like getting Castle and I think they had Harrison Ingram in the second round. I think they only picked one guy in Castle, but I think Castle's going to be a really good addition to what they have. And What other teams did I like? I actually, reluctantly, I'll say I like the Wolves draft. But I think getting a guy like Shannon, who I had a close to lottery grade on, was pretty good value for them as well. Connect, I think, was a good pick for the Lakers too. I think there was a lot of good picks. Klingon falling to where he did it with the Blazers was another good pick as well.
It was so wild to me.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Blazers made out pretty well there. So, but
They
yeah, I
didn't
think
even
the
have to
draft
trade
looks.
up. There was all
Yeah.
this stuff about how they'd have to trade up if they wanted Klingon, but they didn't
Hmm.
have to.
Yep, definitely. So, I always like the draft every year, but I thought this was more fun because it was kind of unpredictable. So, I think
Yeah.
that's kind of the best part about it. So,
What was the biggest like surprise for you, do you think?
definitely the Bucks pick with the AJ
Okay.
Johnson. Yeah, that because he averaged like 2 points a game.
Wow.
So, yeah, I thought that was a pretty big surprise. Kello Ware going to the Heat, I thought was a pretty big
That
surprise. I
was
didn't.
pretty shocking to me because
Yeah,
I don't quite see it, not just like a basketball fit, but just their general like philosophy of like we want to basically almost a finished product who can work hard, and like the athletic tools tend to be um like lower on the priority list, it seems.
mhm.
But Kellel Ware has like, you know, top 10 athletic tools in even a normal draft. So I just think it's interesting to see them go for, it seems like more of an upside swing
Yeah,
than
I
they
think you
normally
could play
would.
him beside Bam as well because he can stretch the floor. So I think that's kind of an interesting point as well because I know they wanted to play Bam a little bit more on the floor. But yeah, I think that was a pretty interesting pick. Um, yeah, that was probably like one of the bigger heater picks that I saw. But yeah, otherwise that was interesting. So
Let's move on to a very it started off really slow, but it definitely became a pretty active free agency, and I would say that especially in contrast to last season. So I basically started like actually following all of this stuff in detail just last summer. So last season was my sort of baseline for free agency, and I would say that was pretty quiet, with the exception of obviously, by the end of the summer, Damian Lillard had moved to the Bucks, and there was all the James Harden sort of nonsense, and eventually he gets to the Clippers. But the actual free agency itself was quiet, not just for the Nuggets, but mostly for other teams too. There wasn't a ton of big movement, but I would say that on the whole, the first 2 days of free agency have been very eventful. Obviously, we can start with the marquee case of Paul George going to the Philadelphia 76ers. That news finally dropped last night at 12:30 a.m. Pacific.
I was
Um,
sleeping.
yeah, I'm sure you were, because like who wouldn't be? I was actually like on my way to going to bed because I was like, okay, nothing's happening. I thought he was going to save it to like
Yeah.
announce on his podcast or something.
You
Because
can't
he had
hide
he had
anything
dragged
from
us
Woj.
out for, yeah, true. He had dragged us out for really weeks at this point, because like in my opinion, he's been trying to leverage the Clippers the entire time. He didn't really want to leave, and I think most of the reporting kind of supports that. But the Clippers held firm and did not want to give him the fourth year on a max extension that he was asking for, and so he decides to go to Philly, and they are willing to give him that fourth year. Philly started making a lot of other I wouldn't say ancillary, but more like role player type roster moves. That's what signaled to me that the Paul George thing was done, because they wouldn't have started making those moves if their big fish hadn't been secured yet. They got Andre Drummond. I think the other move that happened before the Paul George announcement was they had Tyrese Maxey's rookie scale max extension that came out yesterday morning. So I was like, okay, it's probably done, but waiting for the official announcement. What do you make of the way that Philly has seemingly sort of punted on high level wing defenders the past couple of seasons? Like their best point of attack guy was D'Anthony Melton the past 2 years, and he's obviously like a small guard, can obviously keep up with like smaller like pick and roll guards like off the ball, but they don't really have and haven't had uh really like versatile defensive options on the perimeter, particularly to deal with like athletic size. So that's like the one place where I see, okay, I this looks like a really high level team, but this feels like a really important like hole that they don't seem interested in investing resources to fill.
Yeah, no, I mean, Philly, I think probably has leaped up a tier in their conference. Even though I'm still not high on their playoff hopes just because of the past history of an Embiid and Paul George, and maybe combining those two together, they get to the top. But
Yeah.
uh, I'm not really sure that they're going to beat the Celtics. I just think the Celtics are that good of a team. But it could be because Embiid provides maybe a problem for the Celtics as far as being a bigger player, and they don't really have too many bigs to throw at another opposing big, right? That's why they thought
Right.
if the Nuggets played the Celtics, then it would have been a problem because Jokic would have had an ideal matchup against them. And now you kind of have, Maxey was reported to get a max deal now, and PG's on a max as well, right? So that's probably 3 maxes if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah, because Joel's at a super max.
Mhm.
You've got Maxi on the
We have
rookie
a big
scale
three
max,
now, arguably.
and then
yeah,
PG is on a veteran maximum. So
yeah, I think that team's going to be good. I really do because Paul George can play on the ball at times. Maxey's pretty good off the ball as a catch and shoot player. So um, it's an interesting fit. I think the Clippers are probably not going to be as good as they were. You see
Mhm.
Harden got his re-up deal and Kawhi's still there. Westbrook looks like he's on the way out. They got a couple good signings I like in Batum and Dunn, but
yeah, Nico said he was going to retire. Someone made the joke that he might have stayed because I know Joel was like saying like, no, he's not going to retire. He's going to stay here, be a Sixer, whatever.
we wanted
But
to get
then
away
when he
from Paul
found out
George.
that Paul George was coming, he needed to get out of there.
Yeah, yeah, that was funny. But yeah, I think the Sixers probably are a top like what 2-ish seed, 3 seed
Oh
in the
yeah, I
East.
mean they were a top seed. I think they have a better roster now than they've had in the last like this, let's say third season that I've been like kind of paying attention to them. This will be the best roster of the three, and they were well not last year because Embiid was hurt for more than half the season, but the year before that they were a 3 seed, I believe. Um, and they were pretty good with when it was Harden, Maxey, and Embiid. So I think it's an interesting fit. They could be really dynamic offensively. Nick Nurse is a good defensive coach. I just worry about like playoff concern wise, like that lack of high level wing defense is going to pose a particular problem with the Celtics because it's like, okay, who's guarding Tatum, who's guarding Brown, etc. So uh yeah, just it's interesting. They're obviously going to be really, really good. They got their big fish in Paul George when it was like his only option left if he was going to get that 4-year deal. Um, and yeah, I hope they have a healthy season and we get to see some real competition in the Eastern Conference, frankly, because they've been missing that.
Yeah, I
Yep.
will say on that though, I am very interested in the Clippers side because I do think they're not going to be as good.
Yeah,
But I'm like, why did
like the
they
one
offer?
team in the West. Well, there's 2 teams in the West, I would
Yeah, we
say,
need
that
more
are
West teams
definitively
to.
like
Yeah,
bad next season
I
compared
just
to
like
what
think
they
it's
were.
weird. I know Kawhi's better overall, but he's like always hurt. I'm like, why are they offering him an extension and not Paul George? I would almost flip it if I were them, but maybe I'm crazy. But I don't
So
know.
Kawhi was healthy at the time that they offered the extension, and he had played
Hmm.
almost every game last
Yeah, I
season
guess I forget
before
that
the
it
end of
was
season
before he got
stuff
hurt.
because it was like January, whatever. That was interesting because the reporting came out that they had that Paul George didn't know about them offering the Kawhi the extension until it was done and out in the news. Like he found out with the rest of us, apparently. So that would kind of piss me off. Is like, hey, I'm the co-star. Like, you don't even talk to me about this. If the whole plan is like everybody's taking a discount, like, shouldn't we all know about this? Because I said at the time, like, oh, they're going to try to use this as leverage to try to get PG to take a reduced deal. It's like slightly less than a max, and it's only 3 years as opposed to the 4 that they could offer. So it was just like, oh, this was even more awkward behind the scenes than I thought it was. And if I'd known that, I think I would have been more like on board with the idea that Paul George was actually going to leave the Clippers because I still think he was mostly just trying to leverage them. But once you
Hmm.
get to a certain point with, an organization that you don't feel like you can like trust anymore because of like how that like process played out, then it makes it easier to, you know, come to terms with the idea that you're like, okay, I'm gonna get out of here and I'm gonna go to Philadelphia. Obviously on top of that for more money.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm happy if a team can actually beat Boston in some games and not let them go 16-2.
Yeah,
we'll
superstar goes east, which is good.
Yeah.
yeah, for real. Finally.
Bottom line there.
I don't know if I'm gonna put if I would put your playoff hopes in Philly though. We'll see. They still got to prove it to us. Okay, so the other big move that happened this weekend, or another big move, is Dejounte Murray to the Pelicans. This trade happened before free agency opened. They traded Dyson Daniels and was it 2 first round picks in Dyson Daniels for Dejounte Murray, basically.
I think Larry Nance is too.
And Larry Nance, yeah, that's right. My questions are, what is Atlanta doing? Like, I don't, and
Tanking
does this
flag.
make the Pelicans better?
There you go, tanking. That's what I said.
Yeah. I think the Pelicans, for me, I'm just not high on them in general. Anyone that's running CJ McCollum at point guard, I just can't take seriously, unfortunately. But it's not a bad fit between them because McCollum, at least you can have Dejounte kind of compensate for his defense. So it makes sense there. But I don't know. I think Zion's such like an injury risk at this point where it's like it's tough to really say he's going to be healthy enough to make them be a top 5-ish seed. And I think kind of at this point we have a lot of evidence that even though he's a good player, I don't think he's a top of the league guy at this point. So, and for me, that deal for Atlanta, I'm not a big fan of Dyson Daniels as far as a pure draft guy. Larry Nance is, rotation big and then 2 first-round picks. I mean, it's whatever for me. But yeah, I don't think this like poses a threat to the Nuggets or anything as far as like the Pelicans are concerned. But it's an interesting move. But we'll see if they get off of Ingram now. That's kind of like the next kind of move, right? Because I don't think that it's like a bad fit. Murray, Ingram, McCollum, Zion, and who's their big at this point? I don't even know.
They don't have any centers. I keep saying this.
Yeah.
Their big, their front court rotation right now is Zion Williamson and Yves Missi, who they just drafted.
Right. They better not take Daniel Tice from the Nuggets. That's all I'm going to say. But
I don't know.
Yeah.
The centers are going fast. While we were recording, actually, it was announced that Mo Bamba's going to the Clippers. So it's just like the Sixers and Clippers are just like trading players the last 2 off seasons, just like, intermingling that.
Yeah, and I think the Hawks are definitely tanking, so I wouldn't be surprised if Trae Young is dealt next at this point, it seems like. To where, I don't know, but it seems like they're trying to move off all these guys unless they kind of are built on Jaylin Johnson and
yeah.
who I was pretty high on pre-draft, and Trey, so it could be interesting, but
poor Bogey.
We'll
I wish we could free him, but that doesn't seem to be in the cards. Will, why don't you talk a little bit about the Thunder?
Yeah, so the Thunder ended up getting Isaiah Hartenstein, the old former Nugget, who we moved on from. Who did we trade him for? Or we dropped him and got JaVale McGee, basically, or something.
Yeah, JaVale in 2 seconds, I think.
Yeah, and we never played JaVale. So I liked watching him on the Knicks, but maybe that's just because it was in the East. The Thunder had an interesting kind of draft where we thought maybe they would be addressing more positional size, things of that nature, since that was one of their weaknesses, especially like on the glass. They got caught by the Mavs, who were, basically posting up centers in the paint, stuff like Lively, and getting that rim protection and neutralizing a lot of their offensive threats. So they end up with Hartenstein. What are your initial thoughts on that move? And because I initially, I tweeted about this earlier about how I think it's fine from a Nuggets perspective. I don't see Hartenstein as like a threat on guarding Jokic or things of that nature. He's not a perimeter threat. He's a good like mid-range offensive game, good on the glass, like hustle, that kind of thing. I don't see him as like an elite center right now, but those kinds of skills are in high demand regardless. So it's like, and especially in OKC, they needed that. But what are your thoughts on that in terms of OKC and the Knicks and the Nuggets?
Yeah, I think it's a loss for the Knicks for sure. I mean, I think Robinson's probably going to start for them now, which I think is worse for them because he doesn't have as good a touch as Hartenstein does. Not as good as a passer. Better vertical threat as a lob catcher, but Yeah, I think for the Knicks that's kind of a big loss, but I'm not too high on it from the OKC perspective. If you want me to be the contrarian, I think the
Ooh,
Thunder for
spicy.
me, yeah, the Thunder for me were a team that was excelled on playing five out. Shea was a guy that he ate in the paint, right, and he ate kind of kicking out the shooters and applying paint pressure, right. Hardenstein, that really kind of makes it worse because he's just going to be in the paint all game. So
Hmm.
I think from a Nuggets perspective too, Hardenstein and he'll allow Jokic to play in the paint. Jokic was guarding Chet at times, or he'd be hiding on like a Lou Dort, right? But I think now at this point, he can match up with Hardenstein, and it's kind of I think will slow down OKC's attack offensively. So I do think he addresses a need though as a rebounder, but that they needed, in the paint because Chet, obviously playing full time five is not something that's ideal in the long term. But I don't know. I'm not like overly concerned about it, but because some people now are like saying, "Oh, Thunder's going to be a 60-win team," and
Hmm.
this and that. And I just
Getting
can't.
out of the West. That's what I was hearing.
Yeah, I
I
can't get
mean, they
can't
might
get
be
there
a
yet.
60-win team because they're young and athletic, but I don't think that
Yeah.
Maybe.
it's because of like this move necessarily.
And he got a
Like
lot of money, Hartenstein. He got like 80 something million dollars
it
across three
was like, what
years.
was it, 3 years, 87? Let me
That's a
double
lot
check.
of money.
That is a lot of money if they
Because it was
are.
like 20, it was almost 30 million a year, basically.
I mean, we saw
So that
how,
sounds
It's
right. I think
crazy.
it's like 3 years, 87. It's a
you
very
know,
big contract. He was very sought after as well, right? There were a lot of rumors about like, do the Nets snap him up if Claxton leaves? Do the Pistons try to, use their cap space to try to sign iHeart? Obviously OKC has been in the picture. I saw some stuff just over the weekend before free agency opened that the Magic were interested in him at that backup center position and throwing their cap space at him as well. Um, I mean, my thoughts on it are just that what it does is make like defensively Jokic's job in particular easier in a Thunder matchup.
Yeah.
I think because they have the ability to go double big now in a way that doesn't like completely compromise their offense because Hartenstein's a really smart player. He's a good screener. He's a good handoff runner, DHO operator. Has a good floater game and can also finish the rim. It's not like they're putting a non-spacer on the floor because he can space the floor in many different ways and they can figure that part out. And it also neutralizes our like biggest advantage over OKC, which is our size, right? That's something that happened both through the draft and free agency is that everybody in the Northwest Division now has one of the best rim protectors in the league on their team, and now OKC has two because Chet is absolutely like in that top echelon of rim protectors in the league, and now they also have iHeart to kind of give that like double big look as well. So it's just like okay, it's not just like a clear cut we smash anymore this team because they're not necessarily super tiny against us, but I just think it's an interesting move because I talked a lot about on our instant reaction draft show when the Thunder took toe pitch, like, okay, Thunder are like quadrupling down on their play style. They're drafting another guard, all this stuff. Even on draft day 2, I forget who they pick. Oh, they actually they ended up trading to get Dylan Jones, I think it was from the Knicks as well. They were wheeling and
5
dealing
second rounders.
all day. Yeah. But yeah, that's right. I was like, I've never seen have I ever seen OKC trade a first round pick? I don't think I've seen it happen yet. They're just hoarding them. 5 second rounders for Dylan Jones as well. All these wings and playmaking wings and guards. And not so much a big or like a power forward, like a slashing 4 is what I actually think they need, right? Who can also shoot. That sounds like a very expensive NBA player, frankly,
Yeah.
just like the do it all, like a Jason Tatum or like Laurie Markin and someone like that. They didn't get that. They got Hartenstein, but it seems like okay, they're developing some flexibility when it comes to how they build their roster and what the play style is going to be to maximize those players. because obviously Hartenstein's not he's not like a drive and kick guy necessarily, although he can be used in different ways to help initiate those sequences, and I'm sure Dagnall's going to figure that out. But it was in such a way that it's going to make them a little bit more not matchup proof, but sort of matchup resistant in the playoffs. The really, really big emotional one that's been going on for the last couple of weeks, we've been hearing all the stories about how Klay is not going to be returning to the Golden State Warriors. It's very emotional because of all of the fans of Golden State, of Klay, all of the struggles that he's had physically with his injuries, the Achilles, the ACL, all of that stuff, and coming back and helping them win another title after going through all of that. And then going through a really, really rough year last year. It's also very emotional because of all of the haters, including Will.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say
I'm
happy, happy
I know,
emotions.
I'm like, he's waiting for it. Let me get there. Will, why don't you tell the people how you felt when you saw the news that Klay is going to be a Dallas Maverick via a sign and trade?
I didn't really want him coming to the Nuggets. There was that rumor, and he was seen in Boulder, which was pretty funny. So I was happy that it just wasn't the Nuggets. I wish that he maybe went East or something like that, just because I just don't want any other teams having more options in the West. I don't think that's Dallas's biggest need. I feel like they need more answers on the defensive end, because I feel like they couldn't even stop the Celtics. They're a really good offense. They have big players, attackers all around in that roster, so they were struggling to contain them.
And one of their better defensive players, actually, Josh Green, gets moved in this deal because it was this 3-team thing that sends Josh Green to Charlotte, and then Klay goes to Dallas, and Golden State gets like a first round pick and some seconds.
Yeah, I'm really low on Klay right now. Like, I don't think it's going to be a big swing for Dallas. Like, sure, like off the bench, maybe he'll hit some threes and some spacing, but I'm not that big on it, to be honest. What about you, CT?
I think it makes them worse, honestly. Klay is falling off defensively as well. It's more of like a wing defender now at this point, and he's kind of small on that end. And they lost Derek Jones to the Clippers. I think Dallas is worse. I think Dallas had a really optimal run this year to the West Finals. They had a pretty, obviously I can't say easy route because the Nuggets lost to the Wolves, but I do think that their matchups were more favorable for them. Unless they faced the Nuggets, and they didn't even face a fully healthy Clipper team. So I think next year, I think they take a slide back. I'm not really too high on them. I think this kind of makes them worse, to be honest with you. And agreed with Will said that they need defenders, and they don't really have that now at this point. And I'm not a big fan of the Klay move.
My thing with Dallas is that their offense isn't like a playoff-proof offense. And the thing that propelled them this year, like you said, is their defense. And they had all this, not like a ton of versatility, but like enough that the matchups they got, they were able to dominate defensively. Of course, obviously, until they played the Celtics in the finals. I agree they're going to be worse. They'll probably be a better regular season team just by virtue of having fewer injuries than they did this year. They had so many, and a lot of them were Lively, frankly. Like, they were playing at an above 50 win pace when Lively was on the floor pre-trade deadline. So that's before they even get, Gafford, and just having two centers so that you can always have a center on the floor, a rim roller next to Luka, someone who can protect the rim, will just help with that too. Even if you kind of ignore the, post trade deadline, post All-Star break, like who knows what's real or what's fake with like the numbers when you try to analyze that stuff. But yeah, like you said, like Klay has really fallen off defensively. Will and I talked a lot about this when the Warriors got eliminated in the play-in when they played Sacramento, because if you watch that game, it was just like Mike Brown had whoever Klay was defending just come off of off-ball screens, just the entire game. That was the entire game plan. And they got absolutely crushed. And it was really tough to watch unless you're Will. I don't know if did you watch that game live, or were you just like happy about it after the fact? I forget.
I think I watched some of it, but I watched mostly the highlights, and Klay like looking around like it was his last Warriors game. I think he knew. So
Yeah, there were those stories about how after their last regular season game, he was going around the locker room asking teammates to go with him on his boat. I think it was just CP3 and Moody who went. So they were like they knew
mm,
how important it was for somebody
yeah,
to go.
and
And I'm like, oh
and
God,
CP3,
this sounds like a really like he's just like a sad puppy story. It's just like
yeah, and CP3 knew he was on the way out too.
yeah, true.
The Spurs, that was an
So
interesting
okay,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go. If you can talk about that.
No,
Well,
I was just like they were maybe trying to find a trade for him or something like that. Couldn't make anything work, and he ends up. I think they didn't trade him to the Spurs, right?
mm-mm.
He just signed there. I wasn't expecting that. I mean, maybe he thought, hey, like playing with Wemby, this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like if he's gonna be the next big thing, I can at least maybe get there, play with Pop, play with Wemby, see how it goes, be a mentor, pick his brain. I don't think it's anything that's like gonna be significant in terms of them contending. Obviously, they're gonna be better just because it's another year of Wemby. They're figuring it out, drafting some interesting players. Uh, Other than that, I don't have a ton of thoughts on CP3 on the Spurs. It's kind of cool to see like the new and old guard join up, I guess. What do you think, CT?
Yeah, I think it's cool that CP is a guy who he kind of looks like to help the younger players as well. We saw that in OKC helping Shea and a couple of those guys. So I think it's pretty cool in that aspect that he's joining Pop and Wemby there. It seems like this is kind of like the last run for him. So I think it's cool that he's going there. Thought maybe he'd trying to ring chase again, but
Yeah.
seems like that might be behind him now. So but yeah, I think it's a pretty cool move though in the grand scheme of things though.
Yeah, he took $10 million to be like, I'm gonna go throw lots of lobs to Wemby, and I think Will, were you the one that was joking that he was going for the assist title, or was that
I
somebody
don't think
else?
that was me.
Oh, yeah, he might
He
actually
could
get
though.
it. That is if Pop lets him stay on the floor enough for them to, because he's gonna
Why
win those
not?
minutes. CP3 is a plus minus, master, and I don't know how much Pop is going to, want that to be the case when they're supposed to be tanking for a Cooper flag. So we'll
Ah,
see what happens there.
please no.
Lots of very interesting moves happening in NBA free agency. So we talked a lot about all these teams loading up. We talked a little bit about how the Nuggets seem to be regressing, at least to this point. We don't know how the offseason is going to end. They tend to in the last two off seasons make their moves through the waning days of free agency. So maybe we'll have something more to report on by our next episode, and maybe our outlook will change. But right now it's looking pretty bleak. So I wanted to play a little game to just kind of get our thoughts on who the best teams in every division are. We call this our shot clock violation. You'll have 24 seconds. And the way that it works is we'll do it for each of us. I'm going to time for 24 seconds. I'm going to name the division, and Will is going to tell me which team's going to win that division. So that's just by win totals next season, because I'm sure we each have our ideas about which teams are going to be, best positioned to win some regular season games at least next season. Okay? Start. Northwest.
Nuggets.
Pacific.
Lakers.
Atlantic.
Boston.
Southwest.
Magic.
Southwest.
Oh. No, my time. Mavs.
Okay. I'll give you Magic for the Southeast, but you are out of time.
Okay. Shit.
All right. Okay, let's dismiss that.
Damn.
That's good. That was funny because I was worried, like, I was 24 seconds too much time to get through 6 divisions, but it's good. Like, that was a
4
good, because you
seconds
do have to
apiece.
think about it a little bit. All right, CT, are you ready? I'm gonna mix
I
up the
hope
order a
so.
little bit to try to, make it a little bit a little tougher for the people going subsequent. All right, ready and go. Southwest.
Dallas.
Pacific.
Suns.
Midwest.
What I'm trying to think what teams are in there. Is that like Milwaukee or something?
Who's in the
Yeah.
Midwest?
Milwaukee.
Okay, you're out of time.
Is
But yeah, you
Milwaukee.
could give him Milwaukee.
Oh yeah, Milwaukee. Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
It's
That was
tough. It's definitely gonna be
disaster
tough the
class.
first time. The time goes by quickly.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
All right, Pacific.
Clippers,
Southwest.
Mavs,
Atlantic.
Boston,
Southeast.
Magic,
Midwest or Central.
Indiana,
Northwest.
OKC.
Dang,
Stop.
you got them all.
Yeah.
You did it.
I just wanted to
Wow,
get
that was
through that. That's fun. So this will be fun to come back to at the end of next season and see what that's like. But we also we're probably gonna do have a discussion at some point before the regular season starts, after we know like the final rosters of every team, after we'll see some stars playing in the Olympics too. We're gonna see, Super Saiyan Vlatko basically, and just say, nah, the Nuggets are winning it
Yes.
all. So that's what's really gonna happen.
Yeah, international Vlad is a different player.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
For
That's
sure.
why I was so excited for him, and then he got injured. Damn.
I was
He
really
had a crazy dunk too. Did you see
yeah.
Yeah, that was
'Cause
so
they were-
awesome.
crazy
that was a
poster dunk.
preparation game, right? Because the qualifying
Yeah.
tournament starts tomorrow, or maybe like today because it's tomorrow over there, or whatever. But yeah, he had a crazy dunk, and I was really like, oh wow, he's not just like, oh, he's moving well and he's on the floor and playing. Like, he looks really good, a lot better than I expected. Basically, yeah, a year out from the ACL injury. So that is promising. And we heard today that Calvin Booth is apparently traveling overseas to go see Vlatko right now. Maybe to
Was
get
that on
that.
the show? The DNVR show they said that?
Yeah, yeah. He said that Tommy said that when they were asked about Cal. So hopefully they get that done. I would like more
Sign that
certainty.
deal.
I just want more certainty in this roster.
Mhm.
Yeah. for
Okay,
sure.
well, thank you so much for being on the show, CT. We really appreciate you being able to talk about all of the off-season stuff. So it turned out to be a blessing in disguise that you couldn't make the initial show right after the draft. Our listeners, please, look out for our next episode. We are going to have a very special guest, who is also equally as special as CT. All of our guests are very special. To talk about more about free agency. We're going to be talking about the CBA with our pal NBA Chicken, who has been doing all kinds of writing on the new CBA and roster building and what the Nuggets should do and what they should have done, now that some things are done. So that'll be a really interesting and wide-ranging discussion as well. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share on YouTube. Hit the notification bell. Leave us a review. We're on Spotify, Amazon Music, and now Apple Music as well. Finally got that done. That's awesome. And just, always remember, winning is fun and losing sucks, especially losing the off season because those only come around once a year.